you get pigeonholed or you get declared a a blocker, a bad person, a bad teammate, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
And then that goes into the next performance discussion. And there's people sitting around the table that will absorb that information, right? And believe it unless presented some other insight, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I have strategically done is I not only manage the relationship with my boss, but I establish a relationship, a genuine one, an authentic one, with
Mm-hmm.
other people that are going to be in that room.
Mm-hmm.
So that if my boss ever goes in and says, Mel is just not cutting it, he doesn't understand X, he doesn't, his boss,
Mm-hmm.
boss, and some of his peers will be like, are you talking about that guy, Mel Kirk? The guy
That doesn't sound like Mel.
What? That guy? That
Yeah.
don't sound like Mel.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, the narrative, even though I'm not in the room physically, but I am in the room, my presence is in the room because there's other people in the room that can talk about me. And that is the single most important tactic, strategy that I've ever used around managing my own career.
My name is Fela Abioye, and this is How to Corporate, my digital show dedicated to helping you identify what's holding you back so you can advance your career. Are you ready for today's topic? Well, let's get started. Thank you for joining us again for another episode of How to Corporate. Super excited about the topic and having my guest here today. So we're just going to jump right into it, honestly. So, Mel, if you don't mind, maybe please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, your current role, your background.
Mel Kirk. I consider myself a long time change management strategy executive, strategic operations executive. I've worked with several different companies over the last 30 plus years. I'm an industrial engineer by education. I also have an MBA. As we go through the conversation, you'll see that I've worked for 3 or 4 of the signature companies in the U.S. And over the course of my journey, I've had an opportunity to lead and to drive change and to really transform organizations. And in that, we'll get some juicy examples of some things about learning your voice.
So today's conversation, like Mel kicked off, is really focused on finding your voice. Because sometimes when people join a new organization or are looking to get promoted or elevate in their career, they feel the need to conform, right, to how everyone else is doing things or how the organization may be doing things. But when people do that, they may lose a little bit of their uniqueness. They may lose a little bit of themselves in that process. So as someone that has had prior senior level executive type roles, Mel, how have you been able to face that conundrum?
That challenge starts from day one. I remember as a starting industrial engineer, I went to work at a company called Merck, and major corporate entity, wonderful culture, professional culture, and expectations on how people come into the organization, how you perform and how you grow. And in that, the first couple of years that I was there, I did things. I tried to conform. I tried to follow the norms that were laid out in terms of how you manage, how you relate with people, how you dress. In the first couple of years, it was hard to retain my authentic self. I know people use that a lot now these days, but because I was just finding my way, and it's a strong corporate environment. what I learned both there and then subsequently, more than anything, performance gives you performing in your role gives you the latitude to try some other things. And in my first roles there, I performed extremely well, and I was able to raise my hand and move off of the normal track of development where I moved out of industrial engineering and took a job as an environmental engineer, which nobody had gone through in my path. And the only reason why, or the main reason why I did it was as I was thinking about how I wanted to grow my career. I wanted to be an executive down the road and potentially lead the facility. And I felt like, as an example, as a general manager down the road, I would need to know things about, wastewater management and emissions and so forth, because I was in a scientific environment, a research and production environment. And I raised my hand to go do that. And the only reason why I was able to do it was because I had performed in the previous roles. So to me, that's the first and foremost. You don't get the opportunity to declare your independence, if you will, without performing. So that's the first step. Is you gotta do the job at hand.
Now that makes a ton of sense, right? Building credibility, right? Being able to say that, you perform, you execute. So if you're going to veer off, why would anyone listen to you if you're not performing, right? So people are going to have less confidence in your ability to do something that's different from the rest, right? If you don't perform. So I think that's definitely an excellent starting point. So staying in that same vein, right? When you think about finding your voice, because I think, many people sometimes struggle with this concept throughout their career. And sometimes it can be a bit of a straddling line, right? It's a fine line that you have to straddle, in some organizations, because some orgs and teams, they embrace varying perspective, while others say they embrace a different perspective, but you get negative feedback when you don't get on board, quote unquote, right? So with the rest of the team. Yeah. So how do you balance letting your voice be heard while not maybe alienating yourself at the same time?
I'm an industrial engineer, and the majority of my education and my experience over the years, even up through today, has been about driving change in organizations. And as a result, you have to understand how to manage not just the organization, but individuals in the organization, right? So change happens at the macro level, but more importantly, it happens at the individual level, right? Mm-hmm. And so to your point about, about you've got managers that want you to conform. You have managers that say they support diversity and different thought and so forth, but it's words. And then you have the people that truly do. And so the point that I'm making about understanding how to manage at the individual level is I've had each of those scenarios. And in the case of the manager that had no interest in diverting voices, I tried a couple of times, to go in and say, here's what let's just take the case of me having a project that I'm running and I want to go on a certain path. Here's what my analysis says, right? And here's what my training and my expertise and all the work that me and my team have put into to assessing this. Here's what it says, and this is what we would like to recommend. Mm-hmm. And the person, for whatever political reasons or personal reasons, said, no, we want to go in a different direction. I will try a couple of more times with that person directly. But the other thing that I do is I work the periphery as well. So in the one sense, that person is responsible for making a singular decision or a decision as it relates to you and he. But more than likely, what you're trying to drive as an individual affects a broader part of the organization. So I work the other sides of the 360 view to help influence him to move in the direction, or at least to have an open mind in the direction that we want. So if you see you've got a hardened person that wants you to behave a certain way, you've got to use his boss, her boss, their peers to try to seed some ideas that for whatever reason he or she's not receiving from you because you're too young, you're too black, you're too whatever. Who knows what it is? But you have to work with a referee. On the person that is, looking, that is saying but not living it, you use their words. You take examples of the words that they've used, and I restate those back to them as I'm saying this is the direction that. And I don't do it in a confrontational way. I do it in more of a strategic way, right? Of saying, I remember when in the staff meeting and we were talking about it, and this was your position, and I support that as well, and here's what I think we should do. Types of things. So not throwing it in their face and saying, "But you said that yesterday," but finding a way to manage it into the conversation to help them see that they're being a blocker, not a open concept manager.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point, because sometimes, people make statements, and when you hear those words said back to yourself, it hits a little different, right? So because that might not have been their intent when they said it, but well, this is how you came across, right? So this is how I received it. So stating it back so that way it's like, did you really mean this, right? Just to make sure we're all on the same page. And I love that point of being an influencer, right, across multiple settings. I think that's super important. It reminds me, of that old Dale Carnegie book, right? How to influence people and win friends. That's really what the whole focus is being able to, if you want to be able to get a position across or get your point across or get your view across, right? You have to be able to influence. You have to be able to talk to folks, be able to understand. And that's how you're going to get perspective. Hey, if you're enjoying what you're hearing and learning something new, take a second to rate this episode and write a review. Oh, don't forget to share with a friend or a colleague. All right, back to the show.
Yeah, even when you have the most intransient manager that does not want to change, they do listen to somebody. They listen to somebody. Your objective, your mission, as they say, is to find who is the person or who are the people that they listen to.
No, that's awesome.
And you help, you leverage them to help you make your point.
So that's funny. Because as you were making that statement, I think that's a method that my mom used to use on me all the time. So, your parents, right, try to find different ways to get through to you. And especially, when you're in those teenage years or rebellious years, right, your ears start to close up a bit more. And anytime she wanted to get through to me during that period, she would have certain people go and talk to me about a certain message. And so she's like, okay, you can relate to him. You can, he'll get through them. And I would probably say more often than not, it did work. So, kudos to, but for that method, I think that does make a lot of sense. So let me ask you this then. You talked about, you push sometimes, right? And for the folks that may not necessarily receive, when you're trying to get your message across, at what point do you decide it's time to stop pushing maybe so much, just kind of get on board, right? Whether you agree or not. Like, how do you decide when that time is? Because that happens often, especially when we're in the workplace, where there may be a certain direction that, our organization, our team may be going, and you may or may not necessarily agree, and you have strong feelings about it, and you make that voice heard, and you've tried to influence, you tried to get other people to kind of get on board with what your thought process is, but it's not moving. Like, at what point do you just say, you know what, I got to give it up and just move on, right? Because otherwise you start to alienate yourself or get into that view of like, oh, you're not a team player, or you're kind of negative, or all the other negative connotations that go along with it.
My latest role, I was chief technology officer at Ryder, and had responsibility for all technology across all customer-facing technologies that we wanted to venture into, self-driving vehicles, electric trucks, and things along those lines. even when you get to those levels, you still have a boss. There's still somebody that has to ultimately make the final decision, just like a coach on a football team. There is someone else that has the higher responsibility, and you at times will have to say, okay, boss, let's roll. And I've been asked this in interviews for the last, ever since I was like a senior manager, I think. What will you do if you have an idea or a thought or you want to go in a direction and your boss wants to go in a different direction? And what I've always said and what I've lived is my job is to make the case as strongly and as persuasively as I can for the things that I hold purview to, right? If I'm in the room for a discussion about promoting you to the next role, or if I'm in a conversation about what is the right next technology, my role in that room is to represent my voice, my expertise, my background, all of the things that got me to that point, right? And oftentimes, because I am an African American male, I'm also having to carry the voice of diversity, even though that's not my responsibility, right? Mm-hmm. And so I will push my points as intellectually and as vibrantly as I possibly can. And if we come to this, at the end of the road, and my boss says, and the team says, "Yeah, Mel, we hear you, but this is the direction we're going to go because of X, Y, and Z." Because ultimately, my boss, the CEO, and the board will have, the CEO more than the board will have more insights about some other things. And then you have to acquiesce and start to push the charter. And that, to me, is what a good team player is, right? Mm-hmm. So there's an individual that has to bring their talent to bear and do their part, right? And then when the team makes a decision, you got to go. And the only time I struggle with it is when I think there is a moral, ethical issue that's at hand, because otherwise it's a business decision. And, the last person, for a person that's furthest up in the room gets to make the last decision. So. Yeah.
Oh, that's an excellent point. So that makes a lot of sense. So awesome. So so at times, right, people also get hired into roles, join organizations, but aren't always provided the freedom. And we kind of talk a little bit about this a little bit, but aren't always provided the freedom to either make mistakes or even do things differently than what they traditionally have done for years. And in your experience, how have you dealt with that, or have you ever dealt with that in your past?
I have experienced it. So if I've had 25 jobs in my career, 21 of those jobs were a circumstance where I was invited in or I was hired in to change an organization. Hey, and it wasn't that they snuck me in overnight. They came in and said, "Hey, this guy, Mel Kirk, he's coming in. He's a change. He's got Six Sigma. He's got all of these, he's got this expertise from General Electric and all of these different places. And he's going to come in and change our world." When you say that in front of an organization, there's about a third of the organization that will say, "Hooray, change is coming." And they're on board. They are on board for a change. It may not necessarily be the change you're driving, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you got a third that is not interested, not buying it, don't want it, get out of here, right? And then you got a third that will wait and see, right? Mm-hmm. And so again, going back to the earlier point where I said you have to change the organization at a macro level, but you also have to do it at an individual level as well. Mm-hmm. And so when I go into an organization, I actually expect that I'm going to have some conflict. And so I go in with my ears more than even when I'm introduced as the guy that's coming in to transform, change, whatever, deliver us to wherever on high. I still go in and I lead with my ears versus my mouth. And what that allows me to do is to get a read on who's in what camp, right? And who influences whom? And to your earlier question about how do you get this person to move, I'm going to find out who they listen to, and so get a read of the organization in a way that it allows me to then develop a strategy for getting some inertia to move. Because an organization, your new person coming in, they want you to sit and learn how we do it, right? They don't want you to change it, even though you were hired to change it.
Yep.
No, we don't. We've been doing this for 40 years. Trust us, we got that. And so, but I was hard to change you. So I listen first. I've had that conflict at a group level, at a direct manager level, and at an individual level. And I still go back to you've got to listen earnestly so that you can understand what tactic you're going to use to help that person choose to change, or help that person choose to help you do what it is you're trying to do. Because I can't, even though I'm supposedly the change guy, I can't make anybody do anything. And even when I have authoritative power, I still choose not to use that. In most cases, I tend to choose to use influence, which takes a little bit more time and a little bit more listening. But that's where I start in terms of kind of trying to get an organization to allow me to do my job, if you will, kind of spin on your question a little bit. If I am an individual contributor early in my career and I've been brought in and I'm getting blocked, I would have a conversation with my boss. And that's what I've historically done, and say, here's what you've asked me to do. Here's my approach. I'm getting traction, but here's the 2 or 3 areas that I need your help on. And, give them the help. I'm not necessarily asking them per se to solve my problem, but to help me understand a little bit more about the culture. And maybe there's some tactical stuff they can do to help clear the way, but it stands to reason that you will run into a case where you can't just muscle your way through. And then you go to your boss and you ask for the help that they promised you.
Yep. No, I think that's important because, and you hit on a lot of different levels, both the macro level and also the individual level, and coming in with the listening ear. I think I definitely picked up on that, and being able to absorb and receive, but also finding ways to influence, but also just stating when you need help, because it's got to be one of the really tough situations is when you feel like you were hired to do a job, but you're not given the freedom to do it. You're not given the freedom to make mistakes, to go out and try some new things. It's like it's a bit deflating, if anything. So and I think people face that all the time. So I'm really glad you touched on both ways of looking at it, because it's important for folks to be able to go out and figure out ways to overcome. So that's awesome.
Let me add a point. Let me add a point to that, right? Because I've actually, in the last week, I've talked to someone that was having this issue, and
hey, if you're enjoying what you're hearing and learning something new, take a second to rate this episode and write a review. Oh, don't forget to share with a friend or a colleague. All right, back to the show.
I somewhat interrogated the person to try to understand whether or not the resistance that they were getting, was it real or perceived? And that were there real actions being taken by someone in the organization to restrict this person's ability to do their job? Or was it the chirping through the organization of, we don't do it this way, or we don't, I mean, it's not an overt challenge to you not being able to do what you were, they're not blocking you per se. They're influencing you not to move forward. And I think there's a difference in that, right? when folks get stumped because their boss said something or their peer said something and so forth, I think you have to unearth whether or not a passing comment or a series of passing comments that give the impression of being blocked. Go back and weed through that and decide the path that you want to going to take. Because I know people that just because there's noise, they pause, and you can't do that.
In that same vein, when you don't establish your voice, other people can more easily shape your narrative, right? Even your story. And I think someone once told me that no one should be able to tell your story better than you can, right? So, right. For better or for worse. So, your credibility could come into question when someone else can, quote unquote, controls the narrative, right? Someone else controls your voice. So, which of course could shake your confidence and other things. So, any recommendations for how someone could bounce back maybe from a situation where, someone else is, quote unquote, has control over their voice and now they're perceived in a very negative light? Like any recommendations how one could bounce back from that?
In the circumstance where it's happened, right? And you're in the situation and the word on the street is Mel Kirk is not good at X, Y, and Z, right? In that case, I think you've, it's kind of similar, right? Where you've got to work the street a little bit to figure out who believes what, right? Between your boss, your HRM, and some of your peers, I think you go have some some honest conversations with people about what is it that you're seeing, or what is it that you're, what is it that I'm doing or not doing that is, formulating this view of me, right? But you got to be willing to hear it, because some of it might be true, right? And so, and I have been in that situation. This is a great example, right? You're in a room. I'm one of 5 new hires, right? All at essentially the same level, and we go into a meeting with whether it's a director or VP or somebody, and
hey, if you're enjoying what you're hearing and learning something new, take a second to rate this episode and write a review. Oh, don't forget to share with a friend or a colleague. All right, back to the show.
There's people in the room that are asking questions, some genuinely and some just to be seen. And I rejected that whole thing. If I have a question to ask, I'll ask it. But if I don't have a question, I'm not going to ask a question just for the sake of being seen. And so early in my career, that got me listed as disinterested, not engaged, all kind of stuff, right? That I think disproportionately lands on diverse talent, right? That stigma that and so so I heard that a few times in my reviews, and I'm thinking, I'm the smartest person in that freaking room, right? I've got the best education, the best background, all of this stuff, and I'm like, I'm the person you're singling out, because I don't want to stand up and go, well, look at me. So the thing that I thought about a lot was, how do I change the game so that it fits me and what I'm good at? And what I realize I'm good at is I can sit in a meeting one-on-one with someone and be very authentic and genuine and very comfortable. And I can have a conversation, because I feel like if you sat and had a conversation with me, you would see that there's something here, right? That's
for sure.
And you'd feel good about having someone like me in your organization. And that's not being arrogant. It's just, between my education, my experience, and the capabilities and accomplishments that I've had and my personality, I think people would see that, more genuinely in a one-on-one. So when I would go to those cocktail settings or those outings, and a senior leader would say, we'd have a small conversation or something, and they would say, hey, come see me next week, or hey, get on my calendar, whatever. I was one of the people that would actually do that. I would actually, like, as soon as I left the meeting or the next morning, I'd be calling the admin saying, John told me to get on his calendar and I'd like to get 30 minutes and blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
And, the admin was like, I don't know that he really meant that, but I'm like, he said it. He said, so ultimately I would follow up and I would have the meeting, and I would go into the meeting with, I would have, a agenda of such an outline of things that I wanted to share that I felt like they should know about, that person should know about me, or I'm okay with that person knowing about me, to get them one dimension closer to understanding who I am. And that's the way that I did it. Right. And I also, so that's how I helped leaders see me, right, and see my capability. And the reason why this is important is for the scenario you just talked about. You get pigeonholed, or you get declared a blocker, a bad person, a bad teammate, whatever the case may be. And then that goes into the next performance discussion. And there's people sitting around the table that will absorb that information, right? And believe it unless presented some other insight, right? What I have strategically done is I not only manage the relationship with my boss, but I establish a relationship, a genuine one, an authentic one, with other people that are going to be in that room. So that if my boss ever goes in and says, Mel is just not cutting it, he doesn't understand X, he doesn't, his boss, his boss, and some of his peers will be like, are you talking about that guy, Mel Kirk? The guy
that doesn't sound like Mel.
What? That guy? That don't sound like Mel. So all of a sudden, the narrative, even though I'm not in the room physically, but I am in the room, my presence is in the room because there's other people in the room that can talk about me. And that is the single most important tactic, strategy that I've ever used around managing my own career. Because, man, you don't know. I was in General Electric, and I was hired in as a master black belt in GE Capital, and did a bang up job there. And then they asked me to relocate the business from New York to Atlanta, transform the business processes, right? Because Jack Welch said, we don't want to move bad business processes from New York to Atlanta, change the business. So my charter. And when they asked me to do the job, I said, I'll do the transformation role if you include the construction of the building and give me responsibility for helping to develop the culture of the organization that lands in Atlanta. So I got to do some really neat stuff, right? That nobody, in my background and my age at that point would ever get to do. I did that, right? We transformed the business, and the next thing that came up was Y2K, and they said, hey, MK, can you lead our Y2K effort? Because you know the whole enterprise now. So there was a discussion about whether or not they should have me do a regional director role, a regional director role. Yeah, leadership role. Run a business unit, run a region. There were people in the room saying, no, he doesn't know our business. He wasn't cut in GE Power. He doesn't know our field. He doesn't, because I've never worked I didn't come up in the field organization. And even though I had just done all of this other stuff that was way more challenging and impactful, there was people in the room saying, I don't know if we should give him a shot. But there was a couple of people in the room that said, are you out of your mind? I mean, and so I didn't get the first shot, but I got the second one. And I went out and blew the doors off of it. changed it. My region was growing. Was doing $55 million a year like clockwork. Right. I went out, and within 2 years we were doing 130, and I wouldn't have gotten there if there wasn't people in the room that knew me beyond enough to say, give that man a shot. Because you don't want to sit in an organization typecast as this person that can't grow in the way that you want to grow. You don't want to spend 5-10 years fighting upstream. Mm-hmm. If they don't believe it and you can't turn them, then you need to leave, quite honestly.
Hey, listen, you dropped a lot of gems there, a lot of real experiences that really show the power of, again, establishing your voice and why it's so important to not only do that just with, let's say, in the work that you do, but also have influences with other people. And that's something, because that was one of the questions I had was, establishing your voice is a part of your personal brand, right? And so, and it precedes you before you enter a room. And I love the example that you gave, because, you've been clearly doing a great job. You've been doing all these different project work, and everybody's like, yeah, Mel does a great job. I love what he's doing. Okay, well, what's the next thing for him? And then, you have another opportunity that may be a little different from what you've done in the past. And then all of a sudden the narrative changed. It's to say, oh, well, maybe he doesn't really have the right amount of experience. But like you said, if you had not already had some of those supporters, those folks championing you outside of just the folks who are be able to make the one direct decision, then who knows what that would have led. And so that's why it's always so important to, really build that credibility and establish yourself, not only just with the people that you work with directly, but also those who are in your inner or even outer circle as well. So I love that example.
Let me bridge something for you.
Yeah.
Let me bridge something for you, because I listened to one of your last podcasts, and that one on sponsorship. Everything that I just talked about in terms of having people in the room that can represent you and who you are and the essence of what you can do, that's sponsorship. When you're, the difference between mentorship and sponsorship is mentorship. You have a relationship with that mentor, right? You're probably talking to them on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, and you know that person's there. Sponsorship is a byproduct of having positive discussions, hopefully positive discussions with people throughout the organization, that when they, as a result of your engagements with them, whether it's doing the one-on-one things that I like to do, or whether it is at a cocktail party, or whether it is, in a meeting where you're dropping some knowledge or whatever, some of those people will ultimately end up in a room where they are trying to break the tie between who gets a 10% bonus and who gets an 8% bonus, or who gets this next role and who doesn't get the next role, or who's got to wait another year for a promotion. And also, unfortunately, who's on the cut line and not on the cut line when the organization has to do a reduction in force. And so sponsorship matters, right? Because that's those quiet, those folks that are out there, working on your behalf that you may not even know about. And it's how you carry yourself, how you present yourself, and who you represent yourself to be. And again, earlier you mentioned, owning your personal brand, and that's a big part of it.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think you said it very well, man. Mel, you covered a lot. And I 100% agree with the sponsorship piece. I think it all ties in together when you talk about, your voice in the workplace, and how that exudes in your work product, how that exudes in the relationships you have internally and externally, how that exudes in, just how you carry yourself. And, when people can speak about you and really on your behalf, essentially, right, when you're not in the room, right, that goes a long way. It can be to your benefit. It can be to your detriment. So understanding the importance of managing that message and being the narrator of your story, never letting anyone else narrate your story, trying to control that as much as you possibly can, right? That stuff is key. I think that's a huge element that I don't want people to miss too is, through all these examples and through, Mel's experiences, it doesn't mean that you have to, do exactly what you did, but there are a lot of learnings through those examples to say that, okay, how can I apply that for myself? How can I tweak some things? How can I modify some things to be able to better position myself, establish myself, right, in what I want to achieve, throughout my career, man. So thanks so much for sharing. This has been fantastic and really, really enjoyed this. And, so much to learn. I'm definitely going to share, your contact information, if you don't mind, in the show notes. So if anybody wants to reach out to Mel, I think you're available on LinkedIn, right, Mel?
Yes. Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Yep. So I'll share that there. This has been awesome. I'm gonna bring this to a close, guys. Hey, thanks for listening.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. For more content, click the link in my bio to follow How to Corporate on all social media platforms. Until next time, keep building.